Welcome everyone. My name is Felix and I'm your host today. I'm the co-founder and CEO at ADPLIST'S. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone who is joining from all parts of the world. Today, we're extremely honored to have a very special guest with us. He's a true pioneer in the world of design and technology, Don Norman. Don is the mastermind behind the concept of user-centered design, a principle that has completely revolutionized the way products are created and experienced. His seminal book, The Design of Everyday Things, is almost like a Bible for designers and engineers alike, advocating for the importance of intuitive yet accessible design. As a former executive at Apple, Don played a crucial role in shaping the user experience of some of the world's most iconic products in the tech industry. He's also co-founded the Nielsen Norman Group, where he continues to push the boundaries of innovation in design. While Don's work has occasionally stirred great controversy, and we're going to touch on that, but it also created a lot of excitement, and his influence is undeniable in this industry. His vision has not only transformed our tech industry and design industry, but has also fundamentally changed how we interact with technologies in our everyday lives. And if you have read his book, The Design of Everyday Things, it would also have changed the way that you look at doors. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Don Norman. Don, welcome to ADPLIST'S Growth Session.
Thank you. Thank you for that nice introduction.
Don, it's great to have you here today. This is, the largest session in the history of ADPLIST'S. So congratulations to you, and thank you for everyone for showing up today for celebrating this milestone with over 12,000 people who registered for this session. I'd like to start off today by really asking about you, Don. You have retired multiple times throughout your career, which is pretty interesting. And you have come back from retirement again, time after time, almost like Tom Brady. I'm curious, what's keeping you excited these days?
Oh, that's easy. My problem is that too many things keep me excited. And so I have to make sure I focus because I can't do everything. And when you're retired, it's kind of nice actually then to start some other project because it means that I'm in charge. I'm not working for anybody. I don't have to listen to other people. I can do what I wish to do. So I am extremely busy. I'm too busy. But everything I'm doing is what I really want to do. So you didn't mention my last activity, which is actually my last book, right? So
yes.
We neglected to mention this work. And more importantly is the Design Award program that we're establishing, which is kind of based as a result of the book. But yeah, look, when you retire, people sometimes, they think it's wonderful to retire and they're going to do whatever they're going to do, play golf or go swimming or go to resorts. But after a while, they get bored and they don't know what to do with their lives, and many of them die. It's really important to have some reason to be existing. And so what I really like is to keep busy. I mean, I'm still young. I'm only, by American standards, 88 years old. By Asian standards, it's 89 or 90, depending upon which country. And I still have a lot of time to go. And so I'm enjoying being busy.
Don, we all love you and thank you for spending your time with us. And obviously, 88, you're still very young at heart. We're all still trying to keep up. One of the things that you talk about is that you're focusing on, your book, sort of your program, the awards, and obviously you're traveling to new places as well, new and old places. What do you think this phase of your life is dedicated towards? Is there sort of like a theme, a principle that is guiding what you choose to focus on these days?
Well, my philosophy in life has always been to do things that are important, but to enjoy life while doing it. And when I retired for this last time, it was my 5th retirement, my 2nd from the University of California. I said, so what should I do now? And I looked around and the world is a mess. There are really all sorts of new crises that are in the world. There are wars, there's famine, there's floods, there's fires, there's climate change, political issues, the immigration issues all across the world. And I said, my books are all about making things easier to use and easier to understand. And yeah, that's important, but it doesn't change these major factors. So I asked, what could I do about these major problems facing the world? And I analyzed all the problems and learned about them. And I said, there's nothing more that I can add. They've been very well understood, and there are many, many good people working on it. Okay, so what are the solutions? But once again, when I looked around, I said, there are really good solutions, and why don't we do them? Why don't we do them? The United Nations has been meeting now for 28 years to address climate change. 28 years. And you know what the result is? Basically nothing. Why is that? Well, it's human behavior. And so I said, I have 2 degrees in electrical engineering, so I understand technology. I have a degree, a PhD in psychology. I understand people. I was a business executive. I'm now a designer. Maybe this is the right background for addressing why people are not actually addressing the problem. And so that's what's driving me today.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Don. We will dive more into climate change and your work, and also your book around designing for a better world. Now, I want to, since you talk about, how the world is changing, the new world, let's start off with a big picture question. How do you see the role of design evolving in an increasingly complex, political, yet increasingly digital and connected world? How do you see the role of design and designers and leaders evolving in this world?
I think design can become the most important profession of all, because design combines understanding of people. We're designing for people and for society, and it understands technology, because, technology is basically anything created by humans. And it's all the artificial things are, we call them technology. And so we are in a position, except we aren't. And why is that? And so the problem is that I think design ought to be leading the way in almost every discipline, from politics to government to the organization of a company, and of course the development of products and services. But designers ought to be saying what those products and services are. And no, not today. Designers are in the middle level of a company or of a university, and they have to do what other people tell them to do. So why is that? Why don't designers rise to be the CEO, the head of a company, or to be the chief design officer of a company, where they help decide what is going to be done? Well, they don't, because designers are so much in love with the methods that they use that they don't want to leave their methodology and their skills. Well, that's not how you lead the world. You have to be a generalist. You have to understand history. You have to understand politics. You have to understand economics. You have to understand all sorts of things. And so the education of designers is flawed. It's especially true in the traditional design schools, and many are a part of art and design. No. Design is not art. Art is not design. Design is approaching important problems, trying to understand what the underlying issues are, and addressing not the symptoms, but the underlying issues. If you address the symptoms, the problems come back. You have to get rid of the underlying issues. And also making sure that it's done right for people, and don't be a colonialist. So let me tell you that I've been teaching human-centered design for 20 years, and it's wrong. Why is it wrong? Well, it has 4 basic principles, all of which I think are very important and are correct. There's nothing that I teach about human-centered design that is itself wrong. What is wrong is what we don't cover. We don't cover that when we're making physical devices, we destroy the environment in mining to get the materials. We destroy the environment when we smelt the materials to make them available for manufacturing. We destroy the environment during the manufacturing process. We destroy people's lives by using underpaid people in many nations of the world. And we make the equipment, we make the stuff so it's so wonderful and beautiful. Gets more and more difficult to use, the more beautiful you make it often. And it can't be repaired easily. and it's meant to be replaced every 2 or 3 years, which results in piles of junk, electronic junk, and you can't reuse the parts because you made it so small and tiny, it's difficult to take apart and reuse. And so there's burning piles of junk all over the world, like in India, poisoning the air because of the way we do things. And I think you're wrong that we are moving away from physical products. We will always need physical products. In fact, all those digital things that we're developing, where do you think they run? They run on physical products, right? So the more digital, the more physical. But the digital products are also ruining lives because they're deliberately causing addiction. So you spend all your time doing that instead of important things. And in fact, oftentimes you feel guilty for spending all the time doing, scrolling pictures and videos and text. But it's addictive. We have to stop all that. And so why can't designers do that? So one last thing is we have to change design education. We have to make designers more broadly educated. Don't just focus on drawing skills, because in the modern world, not everything requires drawing skills or physical skills. Because if I want to do a new sewerage system or a new health system or a new educational system or a new service, what's the drawing skills are irrelevant. It's our design thinking skills. I can go on and on and on, but I'll let that come out with other questions.
Well, thank you so much, Don. There's so much to unpack there. And, when we first invited you, I've, Utkarsh and myself done so much reading about yourself, watched video. And I think today is the platform where we really understand those thinking and the why. And you talk about, designers, probably design being one of the most important jobs of this century and to help solve problems. Yet designers might not be, realizing the importance of the role that they play, and they might just be lingering around, designing beautiful things. And a recent conversation at last year's config, Brian Chesky talked about how, there's only less than 1% of CEOs in the Fortune 500 companies are designers. Why do you think that's the case? Why do you think, what is lacking from a designer's skill sets or design leader skill sets that they're not able to rise beyond just being a designer in today's world?
I think the problem is in part because we train craft skills, and that craft skills leave out sort of the importance of how the world works. And also we often are trained with an art basis. And artists, they don't like administration, they don't like business, they don't like politics. Well, maybe you don't like it, but let me tell you, if you want to make a difference in the world, you have to understand how a business operates and what it takes to keep a business in business. It has to be making a profit, or the best companies in the world, if they don't make a profit, they disappear. So you have to understand about economics, spreadsheets, finance, how to make an argument. If you want to convince your company that they should do things differently, you can't say, oh, you're doing things wrong. That won't get you anyplace. You have to say, here's what I'm suggesting. Here's a good suggestion that actually will really help the company. Because if you want to change the way we manufacture things so we don't destroy the environment, so that we do what is called the circular economy, so everything gets reused, that's going to cost the company money. It's going to cost them money to implement it. And maybe that means, if the stuff doesn't break down and you have to buy a new thing every couple of years, that destroys our business. We make our business by selling new products. So you have to change what the business is about. And so you have to be able to work out the details to show the company how they can do good to the world while also doing good for the company. Now, most designers don't have that skill. It isn't being taught. And I'm pleased to see that in many nations, the new schools that are arising, I was just in Singapore and I saw what was happening in the polytechs. Some of that is really brilliant new ways of teaching. And in India, I'm an advisor to at least 3 different major schools, and there are many, many more that are starting from scratch. They're not government schools, they're often private schools. And they're teaching what is called liberal studies, which means you get a broad basis so that when you become a designer, you also understand history and politics and economics. And on top of that, you have learned to work together with these different disciplines so that they are collaborators with you. Today, the different disciplines don't talk to each other. They often don't like each other. We have to change the way we educate designers.
Wow, thank you so much for that, Don. It's fascinating that you talk about, how designers should understand business, politics, and just way beyond everything, way beyond design, and that perhaps the one thing that needs to change at the most fundamental level is, starting from education.
The problem is that the way the world works, the economic system is broken. And so the people in power are the people who are wealthy, and they don't want to lose their wealth or their power. And so they don't want to change what they are doing because they are afraid that they will make less money. And that's true, they will. So what? They have lots of money. They can afford to lose less money. But it's not about the money. To them, it's about the loss of power. Well, they want to be the leaders in the loss of power, so they'll be powerful in changing their power. So there are good companies, by the way. There are good people. It's not just all business. But on the whole, the Western system of economics is wrong, yet it's pervaded the entire world.
Well, I'm sure a lot of people here would agree to that, but also there will be a fair share of people who would disagree with that. And I think, we will dive a little bit deeper into this topic because I know a lot of it has been covered in your book, and it's going to be a huge part of today's topic. I want to talk a little bit about, sort of the recent development in artificial intelligence, and obviously back to sort of humanity as well. You have been a pioneer in user-centered design. In fact, you are a Apple Fellow, which by all means it's an invaluable thing, an Apple Fellow for user experience. So you are a pioneer in user-centered design. And how do you see this principle of user-centered design evolving in the next decade, especially with the rise of AI and machine learning? Designers have been talking about how AI is going to change their job, maybe potentially replace in a couple of years' time with the development of AI. How do you see user-centered design change with AI on the rise?
Well, let me start though with the word user-centered design because it's true. I started using that. I wrote a book called User-Centered System Design. My research team wrote that book together. And user-centered system design was also UCSD, which was the name of my University of California, San Diego. But I decided I didn't want to call people users, so I started to call it human-centered design. And people often ask me, what's the difference between user-centered and human-centered design? And the difference is, we just changed that one word. But today I want to call it humanity-centered because I want to say we can't just focus on the individual people who are going to use the product or service that I'm developing, because that's the old-fashioned design, which says our purpose is to make companies richer, to make them able to sell more equipment or more products or more services. And yeah, that's okay, except I don't want to destroy the world in doing that. We have to consider all of humanity, all living things, and the ecological system that supports life. That's humanity-centered design. And also we have to don't be colonialists, the way the British came into India and said, oh, you can't govern yourself, so we'll govern for you. No. So the human-centered design people, basically what you do is you try to imagine, oh, there's some people in India. Let me see if I can do something that will help them, the poor people. And they design some of these clever things and they give them away to the Indians. No, that's not the way you do things. Nobody likes to be told what is good for them. What you do is you go and you find people who know what their problems are. They're living there. They know their problems. They're already addressing them. And so designers are really good facilitators. They can help because they may only be able to address the symptoms because they don't have the resources to go after the underlying issues. And basically, the underlying issues are almost always going to be political. And so we can help with the political issues, and we can help getting more resources, and we can help if you're doing a sanitation system or clean water, you need to know about science of sanitation and water and things. And so we can bring in those experts to be assistant, not to tell you what to do, but to help you. Now, one of those experts is going to be artificial intelligence. And I think that it's much too early to judge what is happening in the AI world. It's only been out about a year. And let me tell you, in 5 years, it's going to be completely different than it is today. And the people who write about it, the journalists, they love to find all the flaws and talk about them. Yes, there are many flaws, and many of them are serious. But there are now thousands of people across the world trying to minimize or eliminate those flaws, and it's going to change. And how is it going to change jobs? It's going to change jobs a lot. But in the history of technology, all introductions of technology changed the way we lived and the way we worked and the way we did things. Most of the time for the better. Not necessarily, but most of the time. And I believe that there's nothing different about this one. It's going to change, though, different kinds of jobs. Because in the old days, the technology made us faster, made us stronger, made transportation better, communication better, but it didn't change the nature of high-level jobs. It was mainly replacing low-level manual labor jobs. But today, that's not true. Today, it's replacing all kinds of jobs. But they shouldn't replace the jobs. If you actually look about how it's being used and what it's powerful about, we should treat it as a wonderful tool that makes our lives better, that makes us able to be better designers. Because a lot of design is doing a lot of grunt work. You have to do the details, and you have to worry about all sorts of little things. Using AI, what you can do is let it worry about the little things. What I worry about is, how are we going to approach this problem? And how do I describe it? And when I work with a tool like some of the generative AI tools, how do I describe the problem? And then when I'm giving back an answer, yeah, that's not what I need. That's the wrong way. You didn't understand. And because look, the modern AI is pattern recognition. It recognizes patterns that have existed in the past, and it sort of flumps them together in some novel way, but it doesn't understand what it's doing. It has no moral values. It doesn't understand ethics. It doesn't understand how people work and the people care about. It just understands what's happened in the past, usually in the printed world. Printed and nowadays published world, if you will. So it includes video and audio, but it's not really intelligent. Remember AI, the first word is artificial? Yes, it's artificial. So artificial things can really help us, things that do make us smart. I wrote a book called Things That Make Us Smart. We can use it to make us better, but we have to learn it. Don't fight it. Understand it, study it, practice it, use it every day, play with it, learn what it does well, learn what it does badly, but don't accept what it gives you as a result. Accept it as a rough idea that you, as a great designer, can make it even better and better.
Wow, thank you so much for that, Don. It's you have so much optimism around AI, which I think is inspiring. And all of us hopefully find it inspiring as well. I want to touch on the point where you talk about not being afraid of AI, but really leaning into it and using it as a partner. As you said, AI has been maybe normalized over the past year or so, which is surprising because it feels like our entire life has changed because of ChatGPT and a couple of AI tools. What has surprised you the most about this initial phase of AI? Has anything surprised you as a designer, as someone
Well, yeah, I'm relatively expert in AI. First of all, I've published in the AI journals for a long time, starting with the 1970s. And some of the very first neural networks were developed in my laboratory, not by me, but by my colleagues, David Remelhart in particular, someone I wrote many, many papers with. And we had started a cognitive science program, and we had a bunch of postdoctoral fellows, and we were teaching them what we knew and what we were interested in. And some of them told us we were wrong. And I like being told I'm wrong. Because, look, if I'm wrong, I want to know. I want to change what I'm doing. And I learn that way. You learn more from being wrong and from making errors. And this is true of your design work, too. You learn more from the designs that fail than from the ones that succeed. If they succeed, you say, see how brilliant I am? No, you may not have been brilliant. You may have been lucky. But if it fails, you have to stop and think about why. Anyway, we were talking about what was called perceptrons, which basically was a one-layer set of neurons, and they were very flawed. They couldn't do very much. And one of the people said, one of my postdoctoral fellows, Jeff Hinton, said, no, that's not right. There's more modern methods today. And so he and my colleague Dave Remmelhart soon developed a 3-layer neural network with what's called a hidden layer. And today's new networks are basically that, except the layers are huge today. And instead of one hidden layer, there could be hundreds or thousands. And so we're talking about huge scale. So Jeff Hinton has now been called the father or the grandfather of modern AI and of deep learning. And he also is partially responsible for the T in GPT, the transformer part. But I asked him recently when I met him at Google, so what was a theoretical breakthrough that allowed the modern AI to work? And he said, not much. The real breakthrough was that today's computers are 1 million times more powerful than the ones we started with. It's the power of technology that has made it possible for it to read and experience all the written material and all the stuff that other people have created throughout history, basically. And that's what is the database. So I think all of us were incredibly surprised by the power of the modern deep learning neural networks, large language models, because we never had a large language model before. The computers weren't capable of it. No one could spend $1 billion building the systems that would do this. And so everybody was surprised, including the world's best experts in AI. They were surprised. But I want to remind you that at first it seems very, very wonderful. But as we delved into the details, we realized, sometimes it makes things up. And it really doesn't understand people. And it doesn't understand life. And it doesn't understand politics. And it doesn't understand all sorts of things because it has no understanding. It's simply pattern matching, looking for patterns in the past that might match something it's trying to put together to answer your question. Is it wonderful? Yes. Is it powerful? Yes. Is it useful? Yes. Here's an example, 2 examples for you. 1, we're going to change the way we interact with machines. Instead of looking at menus and issuing commands, we're going to be doing conversations. It's going to be conversational interaction. It's going to be, hey, drive more slowly, or please take the tourist path. I want to see the views. I want to see the sights. Or would you? How about writing? I'm trying to write this letter and I'm having difficulty. Could you make it a bit less formal and more friendly? It sounds too much like I'm complaining. That sort of thing. And then you can look at the result and say, well, yeah, that's okay, but it's not right. And then you either modify it yourself or to ask it to do it again. And you have to learn how to instruct. Just like if you're a manager and you hire a new person, guess what? You ask them to do a task and they won't do it right. You have to explain to them why it's not right and why it doesn't fit this company or why it doesn't fit this need. Well, that's what AI is going to be like. And finally, it's going to change things like instruction manuals. So, for example, I just bought a new car. It's an electric vehicle, and it's very automated. And there's a 400-page manual. That's crazy. Who's going to read that?
That's crazy.
We can get rid of these manuals. What we're going to do is we're going to take the same stuff that's in the manuals, which is what every control does and so on, and put it into a big database and put that into the large language model. And then instead of manuals, no more manuals. We'll just ask. Because manuals show you what every little thing does, and that's not what you care about. You want to know, how do I do this task? Or, it isn't working. Now what do I do? So that's what we'll do. We'll be able to ask our manual a question because it'll be an AI. We can say, I don't understand. I can't change this anymore. What's going on? And it will tell you. Or how do I do this new task? I want to do something I haven't done before, but I know the system can do it, and it will tell you. And that's going to change a lot of things. And it's you that as a designer, you should lead the way in developing these new conversational interfaces, new conversations which are based upon specific specific information that's relevant to the tasks that we're doing. Don't rely on the large language models. Those will get all mixed up with all the stuff that's read, and that's got nothing to do with what you want to really do. So give it the important information that can really help you. And by the way, it's not fair and it's probably illegal. What we did is we took every other people's paintings and artworks and music and writings, and we stuck them into this computer. We never asked for permission. So we have to stop that too. We have to start learning how to do this properly. Wow. But I really think there's great power in what's happening.
Don, thank you so much for sharing that. This is the platform for you to voice this, and I think a lot of people would, obviously learn about your thoughts as well. And I find it extremely fascinating. I think when you talk about sort of AI, being evolved from your lab, and almost it's a machine of pattern recognition, and maybe someday it goes beyond that. We never know. But thanks for sharing that. And I'm also fascinated that Jeff Hinton, which is the godfather of AI, it's from your lab. It sounds like a pretty legendary lab that breeds amazing inventors and folks like yourself. So I appreciate you for sharing that historical context. I want to talk a little bit about sort of some of your, I think, what you have written in the past, especially sort of your ideology on simplicity versus function, and I think that's a huge topic as well for a lot of designers. Don, your work has obviously has undeniable impact on the design industry, but it has also sparked some controversy, particularly between the balance of simplicity and functionality in design. You have publicly been critical about Apple's design philosophy, which often prioritizes minimalism. And in your article, you wrote, the title "Simplicity is not always the answer." So, looking at that, how should designers and leaders think about this challenge? And what advice would you give companies facing this dilemma of simplicity, oversimplicity, and functionality?
I don't think there's any issue about simplicity versus functionality. But look, complexity is in the world. Simplicity is in the head. So people who say, oh, simplicity means get rid of all those buttons and all those controls. No, they're missing the point. Actually, sometimes when you add buttons and controls, it makes things simpler, easier to use, easier to work. Take a look at how waiters now take orders. They use a handheld computer, and it's got lots and lots of different categories. It isn't very simple. It looks very complex, but it's actually simple to use because almost anything somebody wants, there's a button for. So instead of figuring out how to put in something, you just find the right button and push it. And after you've used the system for a while, you know where all the buttons are. And then there's usually a place where you can write some, command that is, doesn't like hot sauce or something. But the simplicity is understanding. And I like to use an example of my kitchen. My kitchen is really simple to use. If you came into my kitchen and tried to cook, you would find it a disaster. You wouldn't know where anything was. And you'd find it very confusing and complicated. Now, why is it simple for me and complicated for you? Well, because my wife and I have put everything in the kitchen where we want it to be when we use it. So we don't have knives in one section. We have different knives in different places, depending upon what we're doing. So we know at that place, we need this kind of a knife, and at this place, we need this kind of a knife. And our everything we have is sort of distributed according to the way we use things. So therefore, it makes it easy for us to know where, first of all, when we wash the dishes, where to put them back. And second of all, when we need to find something, where it is. A new person coming in, they can't figure it out. So if I go to someone else's house and I say, oh, let me show you what I've learned how to cook, and I try to cook in their home, I can't because I can't find anything. So it's complex to me and simple for the people who live there. And that lesson is true of all the things. I remember in the early days, I think I even put it in Design of Everyday Things. I looked at a modern bus, and it was really, there were all sorts of controls. And I talked to the driver. And I said, well, how do you learn them? And he said, well, there's no problem. Everything is where it ought to be. Everything is where it ought to be. What that means is when you thought about the task he has to do, so like he has to open up the door on the front and the door in the back. And so the controls for that, well, when he turns towards the door, there's the control. And the controls were sort of relevant to where the doors in the bus were placed. And everything else was located according to the way he needed to use it. That's good design. And the problem is that Apple fell in love with a great industrial designer who believed in making things look simple. Simplicity. Well, that's okay, except it got in the way of usage. Second of all, words are ugly. So got rid of the words. And so pretty soon we didn't have labels on the icons and labels on in fact, we even got rid of the icons. So if you want to use an Apple iPad or a phone, you have to know how to gesture, right? I have to touch from the upper right and come down, but only come down halfway, or I have to start from the bottom and go up only halfway, or maybe all the way, or maybe go halfway up and then hold my finger there. And then maybe I have to swipe left or swipe right. And who can remember which is a which, swiping left or left? I can't. And there's no way of learning because there are no labels, nothing that can remind you. So it's crazy, just crazy. And it's beautiful, yes, but I can't use it. And people wanted the bezel to be so thin. They didn't like the fact there was a thick bezel around the display screen. Well, these are touch-sensitive display screens. And whenever my phone rings, I pick up my phone and my finger hits the screen. And guess what? It touches something. Who knows what it touches? But the phone then goes into some weird location, and I can't answer the phone. I can't find the phone call anymore. Why is it that I can't pick it up without making it do something bizarre? Well, because it's beautiful, isn't it? It's small, and look at the big screen. And the journalists love that, even though they must make the same errors. So, yeah, you have to really think about people's usage. And then when you make something easy to use, it's something that fits them. It's not something that looks wonderful and gets honors and medals because it's beautiful and simple and so on. You can't give a medal for a good design just because it looks good. That's crazy. It has to work well. It has to work well for people. They have to understand it. And most important of all, when something goes wrong, and things always go wrong, you have to be able to understand what went wrong and what you should do about it. And most designers are simply looking at making things easy to use when everything works. No, the hard part about design is making it easy to use when something goes wrong.
Wow.
In other words, simplicity is very complex. It's difficult to make something that's simple for people.
I love what you talk about, simplicity is in the mind and not in the number of buttons or the number of clicks that happen. And sort of your analogy on the bus, the bus driver really hits home. And it really reminded me, I think, of recent, Apple Vision Pro launch. I have not used it, but just from the many gestures that I've seen on the TV, I couldn't even memorize it or even get around. So I think those are probably one of those instances where you talk about that.
Well, the trouble with virtual reality of this sort is that because you are involved, you're in this new world, and everything is created by the computer. The traditional physical controls don't really work well, and so a keyboard is difficult to use if there is no keyboard, and or even if there is one, you don't see it. Well, there are some solutions to that, which is Apple does that actually. It allows you to see the world as well as see the virtual world. And but part of the reason you use those gestures is because we're doing different things. So I still think, though, it's looking at some of the new work in virtual and augmented reality. I say the same thing I say about AI. Now, those, virtual reality has been around 20 years or 30 years or more, and the augmented reality is relatively new, but we're still learning. And so the fact that we still have these weird gestures, and some of the gestures Apple developed are really clever, but they may not work for everybody. But we're learning, and so yeah, we will learn, and I bet over time things will migrate and change so that they become usable for everybody. Just like I'm telling you that AI is not going to be the same 5 years from now as it is today, nor will these Apple and other kinds of, Apples and Facebook's Meta work. Those will be different, and there'll be other brands that have come out, other companies.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Don. That sounds like we have two different camps of people on the Apple Vision Pro and obviously the Meta Quest. And I just want to highlight this. I think while we're at this conversation midway, that I think it'll be kind of unfair to just call you a designer or a design thought leader or something along those lines. You feel more like a futurist and technologist to me, which frankly isn't really the case when I speak to designers, these days. So I want to really call that out. But I'm also curious, like, where did that come from? Like this curiosity for new technology, because, when we talk about AI, when we talk about VR and AR, you seem to be very well versed with more topics than just human-centered design.
I remember I started as an electrical engineer, designing circuits. And then I wanted to design computers, but it was too early. Basically, computers didn't really exist much. The main computer was called the Remington Rand Univac, which was a monstrous computer. It was huge. You had to walk inside it, actually, to work on it. And it had 1,000 words of memory. I mean, those were really the early days of computers. And in fact, you programmed a machine language. There weren't any higher level languages in the early days. So I started from a long time ago. And so I've lived through the many different revolutions: the information processing revolution, the computer revolution, the telecommunications revolution, the modern revolution of new materials, batteries that are small and powerful, electric motors all over the place. I mean, when I look at my automobile, it must have 100 different electric motors in it, and it may even more. And I know it has more than 100 CPUs in it. And it's a very complex place, but it turns out that, I happen to have a background in all of that. And fortunately, I've been able to keep up my background knowledge as well, because I've been doing technology all my life. But I also was an industry executive, and that I began to understand that the way you do things in industry is very different than what you learn in school. Most people who teach school, most professors, they've never had a job in a company in their whole life. So when they tell you what's important in the world, they actually don't know. And most business professors have never worked in a business, so they don't know either how it really runs. And so when you go off to industry, you discover that people, when I joined industry, I said, I'm an expert. I just finished this book called The Design of Everyday Things. Well, in those days, it was called The Psychology of Everyday Things, but it's the same book. And I said, I really understand what's going on. And I had been consulting for companies like Apple and the Xerox Palo Alto Research Center, where the very first, what you see is what you get, menu-driven computers were developed, and I was using them. So I thought I was all right, ready to go. But no, it turns out that all the wonderful theories and work I did was, wonderful, but it wasn't useful. And when people had questions, they would ask me, I would say, that's a really good question. We never thought of studying that, so we don't know the answer. And so there's a big difference between what is needed to do things and what is needed to understand the underlying principles. Both are necessary. But I found that what was most valuable in my life was going back and forth between industry and academics, working in a university, studying the underlying fundamentals and trying to increase our understanding and knowledge, but going to companies and discovering what it is they needed to do in order to make a real product that you could actually use. The two are complementary. So going back and forth is really powerful. Each one informs the other. So the other thing is that our educational system has become too specialized. You learn a specialty, and they're so specialized that if you're in a department of computer science, say, You don't even understand what all the other people in the department do. The theoreticians and the software developers, they're in two completely different worlds with almost no overlap. And the same is true of every field. They become specialized that people in a department don't even know what all the other people are doing. And that's crazy, because when you build something, you can't be a specialist. You have to be a generalist. You have to cut across all of these different areas. But we don't teach people that. Now, sometimes we do in design. We teach them, oh, you have to work together. You industrial designer and graphic designer, interaction designer have to work together on a project. Well, that's good. That's important. But they also ought to bring in someone from marketing and someone from economics and someone from finance and somebody from sales, because you need to learn to work with those disciplines too, not just the people in your own major discipline. So, but let me also point out, if you want to learn about people, where do you learn? You don't learn from psychologists or sociologists or anthropologists about people. There you learn about some special little component of people. But you want to learn about people? Go find a person who writes for a living, a novelist. Because a novelist is somebody who has to really understand people, because when they write a story, you have to read it and say, oh yeah, I know people just like that. So if you read closely those stories, they tell you about all sorts of things, about when the person scratches themselves or how they got lost driving down the street or this, that, and the other. They're the ones who understand people. So I'm against STEM education, because STEM is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And yeah, I was trained in all of those, but where's the people? There's nothing about people in STEM engineering. And how can we design things as designers without understanding people? So we have to bring in the humanities. And let me tell you that history of the world is critically important. I spent a lot of time in my book about that, because the way we act today, the way we are created and the way we think is historical. It's based on what happened in the past. And it's not necessarily the correct way to do things. It's simply the way it's always been done. In fact, you ever hear somebody say, well, that's how we've always done it. Oh, that's a good opportunity to make a difference, to change how we always do it. Because in the physical sciences, when you measure something, there's a statement, if you can't measure it, you don't understand it. And it came from a physical scientist, Lord Kelvin. But that's not what he said. He said, in the physical sciences, if you can't measure something, it means you don't understand it. But in the social sciences, you can't measure those things, because in the physical sciences, if I drop something 10 times, it'll drop the same way. The physical laws of, Newton's laws of dynamics apply the same way every single time. But not if I drop a person. Come on, drop a person 10 times, you're not going to make it. They won't allow you to do it.
I want to kind of like touch on that point, which is really, really interesting, which you talk about. I think you mentioned this in your book as well, and sort of you just talk about human behavior, and a lot of our behaviors as humans, date back to us just, like being sapiens, right? Like there are very innate traits of that. You mentioned something, in your book along the lines that that the hardest problem to solve is human behavior. It's not technology, it's not economics, it's not general stuff, but it's actually human behavior that is the hardest problem to solve or to figure out. Can you explain a little bit more about that, of human behavior, and why is it more complex than any other problems that we're looking at?
Because everybody is their own person. And they see the world through their own eyes based on their history, their experiences. And they often have different values than others. And quite often when you get people together, they are arguing and they are disagreeing. In fact, when you try to do things to our community and you're trying to help them, and you say, I'll do what it is that you need, it turns out they don't agree with what they need. And so it's very hard to work with them. But what it is oftentimes what people are doing is they're coming in from their point of view. And from their point of view, what they're saying often is correct. And so what you have to do is understand each person's point of view. And if you can get everybody to realize that each of them in many ways is correct from their point of view, that there may be a way of actually accommodating that or finding something there everybody agrees upon. Or maybe there's a way of modifying things so there's a compromise where everybody is happy, but they don't each get what they wanted exactly, but they get close enough. Because again, everybody has a different history. And on top of that, we have different cultures. So the culture of the East is different than the culture of the West. We often talk about the culture of Asia being different than the culture of Europe, but that's not a really good way of thinking about it. Because first of all, Asia is so many different countries, each of which is different from one another. And Europe is so many different countries. And actually inside a country, there are many different cultures. Inside large countries like India or China, there are many, many different cultures. If you take a country like Singapore, now it has fewer. It brings together many different countries. But Singapore is one of the best governed countries in the world because actually it's a small island. It's one city. And so that makes life a lot easier. But in the world, we have to learn to understand the differences and work with them and accommodate them.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. A lot of it comes down, I think, as you mentioned, like it's really beyond design, but really just understanding sort of the human's nature, what are the truths and what are the
that's not beyond design. The great designer has to take that into account and understand that. So it is not beyond design. And one of the reasons I say that design should be the most important topic of all, because we are doers. We aren't just thinkers. We are doers. We go out and we make changes that make a difference to people's lives, which means we have to understand things way beyond what is traditionally called design. We have to understand something about, well, maybe everything.
So basically what you're saying is that like design is encompassing a lot of these things, and we haven't historically really thought about it that way, but moving forward, we should be thinking about it that way. That is that design should encompass understanding the most fundamentals of human nature.
I've never found an issue where a designer could not make a difference. Because we tend to think we don't say this is how it's always been done. Yeah. We say, what is the real issue that we're trying to address? Don't tell me what you want. Tell me what the real problem is that you're trying to work on. Mm-hmm. And let's see if there's some way of doing that. And quite often it's very different than what people have been doing in the past, because we'd step back and take a look at this general issue. When you ask people what they want, usually they'll tell you what the difficulty they're having with some current way of doing things or some current tool or device. But that's not the solution. The solution isn't to make that better. The solution is to back up and say, but why do you have to do that anyway? Why do you have to do this at all? Maybe there's some other way of accomplishing your real goal. And that's what the designers do, is you take a new look at the problem. We teach problem solving to many disciplines like business and engineering. They're really good at problem solving, but they don't stop and ask, is this the right problem? Good designers always ask, is that the right problem?
Thanks for sharing that, Don. I want to touch on your work, especially on your book on designing, design for a better world. I think a lot of it centers around sort of sustainability and designing much more meaningful things and obviously a much more meaningful life. One of the things that curious me is that you spoke about a lot of things that are wrong in the world, politically and environmentally and whatnot, but also a lot of the work that you have sort of shared in the past as well. Some of them are sort of in conflict with that, right? So I'm curious, like what kind of maybe allow you to step into this realization and write this book of design for a better world, because I think it's inspiring. It creates new idea and new thinking and new framework of thinking around sustainability as well, from both environmental and life perspective, right? So what allowed you to kind of step into this new frame of thinking and writing this book?
I'm always learning. One of my one of my principles of life is to always be learning. I try to learn something new every year, and yeah, quite often what I said 10 years ago or 20 years ago is wrong. And when I discover things are wrong, I change what I'm doing, and I change what I'm saying, and I change what's harder, and I change what I believe. So changing my underlying beliefs, that's harder. That takes more time, but I have changed. I've changed. Believe me, I changed very dramatically since the early days when I was an electrical engineer and thought that people got in the way. You know, my devices would really work better if people didn't misuse it. Well, that's obviously not what I say today. And yes, I'm always open to new ideas. I'm curious. I try to learn new things, and I like being told that I'm wrong, especially if it's done intelligently, and especially if it turns out I really am wrong. That's how I learn.
Thanks for sharing that, Don. And we're all learning as well from you today. And this is obviously a big book, and we're not going to touch on every point. But I do recommend everyone to read it. It's inspiring in every ways. I'm just curious, Don, just from sort of writing this book, what has been the biggest realization or surprise for you when you write this book, when you are maybe doing a research, talking to people? What has been the biggest surprise of this topic of designing for a better world?
I think the biggest surprise was that I didn't know enough about the history of the world. And the more I learned about the history of the world, the more I realized how artificial the world is and how it can be changed. And I started off by saying, I look out my window. And in fact, where I'm sitting right now is where I had said that if I look out the window right there, you can't see the window, but I can. And I can see, I'm looking south, and there's palm trees, and there are birds, and there are animals. And I can see in the back mountains, and I can see the famous, and there's waterways. There's called Mission Bay, where there's lots of water and people have water sports. It's all artificial. That the animals are real, yeah, but I'm on a steep mountain, well, a steep hill, and so it had to be smoothed and made level so that you could put the house here, and the pine trees were all planted by people, and so the artificial planting and so on made a wonderful place for animals to live. We have rabbits, we have hawks, we have coyotes, we have just hummingbirds, all sorts of animals. And the recreational area used to be a swamp. It was transformed into a recreational area. And the mountains, well, they're in the country of Mexico, and the mountains are real, but the notion of a country is artificial, is invented by people. And the boundary between them, which is today a very difficult political area between Mexico and the United States, that's artificial too, is artificially defined. In fact, the United States took it from Mexico by force in the early years. And, and one of the books I was asked to read was something called The History of Cotton. And it was called The Empire of Cotton. And I said, why should I read that? I don't care about cotton. And the person who was telling me this, I trusted. And so eventually I read it. It was all about the way that English dominated the cotton trade in India, in Indonesia, growing cotton, taking it to India, where the Industrial Revolution had just started. So they would take the cotton and they would transform it into cloth. And then they would be able to sell the cloth, et cetera. But pretty soon what happened was they controlled the world of commerce back in the 1700s. And the main reason was because they had the strongest navy in the world. Not because they were right, but simply they had power. And then what happened eventually is they wanted to move it closer to England. It made it easier, and they moved into what was then the United States. But people didn't want to pick cotton in the United States. So what they did was they traded the fiber, the cloth they were making. They went to Africa and they traded it with the African nations for slaves. Because when the African nations fought with each other, and they are always fighting, and the people that were captured became slaves. So they purchased those slaves and brought them to the United States, and that's where slaves entered the United States. And it was all about economics. all about economics, and it dominated the world. It changed the whole world. And so learning about things like that, I never thought that I would have to understand cotton, but I did in order to understand what happened in the world and the impact of commerce about the way everybody lives, and the fact that we now today are still taking advantage of the poorer nations of the world by having them do the dirty work where they get paid almost nothing because, well, people in the United States or in Europe, they have to pay them too much money, so we do it in other countries. And that's not good for the world. It's not good for the world. But that's what was my biggest surprise, is how important history was to understanding the problems of today.
Is there a place where you would recommend us to catch up on our history, like whatever that you have read?
The best, easiest place is I try to give all sorts of references in the book, and the book sort of summarizes what I thought was important. That doesn't mean there aren't lots and lots of other areas, but it's a good way to start, I think. And I'm not the only person who's doing this. Yeah. There's one more thing I want to talk about before we quit, because it's relevant to the book, which is what can I do besides writing the book? Now, if you ask me what kind of a designer I am, I finally realized what the correct answer is. I'm an educator. What I really do best is I educate people. So what do I design? I design designers. And but I realize that design itself is not where we're going to get the answers, because designers tend to do their designs and then give it to other people to implement. And what matters is not what you design, but matters is what people make of it. And so I wanted to recognize practitioners, people who do things in the world that make a difference. And when do you want to give a recognition to somebody? Well, the world is filled with prizes for famous people who do very important work and they get a prize. It doesn't do any good. When you're well known and you've already been doing things, you have lots of prizes. You get another prize, so what? It doesn't change what you're doing. It's really nice, but it doesn't change what you are about to do. And so I wanted to give a prize to people who, I don't care what their background is. I don't care how old they are. What I care about is they're working to do something that benefits society, and they have to have evidence. So first of all, they have to be early career. They have to be doing this for the first or second or at most the third time in their life. So even though they're 60 years old, if they just started in this field, they're early career. And they have to have some evidence at what they're doing. And what kind of problems? Well, the United Nations has a list of 17, what they call Sustainable Development Goals. And the first 16 of those talk about all the major issues that face the world. And so, address any one of those issues that they talk about, because each one of the 16 is huge, like hunger, like adequate education, like adequate health care, like clean water, like jobs. And so they're all big problems. So you approach that, I want to reward you. So we're having we call it the Don Norman Design Award. And we're going to, first of all, give awards to early career people who are making a difference when they need it most, when they can say, hey, you're just getting started, but we think you have great potential. And this will allow them to get more money in order to finish their jobs. And second of all, I want to reward the educational institutions that are training people to do this. Now, the first one is a contest. The second one, no. All educational institutions that are doing this should be rewarded equally. And so we just started. We're now starting to get applications. So you just go to, it's called DNDA, which stands for Don Norman Design Award, DNDA Design.
Yep.
And please do apply.
We'll be sharing this link to those who can't join as well, so everyone will receive the link to apply.
And I've seen some of the really neat new things that are coming out from people I never would have expected, and they're coming in from all over the world.
Well, Don, it sounds like an amazing award, and I'm gonna definitely apply it for our team as well. But Don, as you know, we might be running a little bit short on time. I do have probably two more important questions that I think I really want to ask you today before we wrap up. Yeah. So you talk about a lot on societal well-being and sustainability of the planet. How can designers ensure that their work not only addresses immediate economic needs, but also contributes to long-term sustainability and societal well-being?
You can't. You do your best, but it's difficult to predict what is going to happen in the future, and difficult to predict the way that whatever you do will be used. When the automobile was first invented, first of all, there were three different ways of powering it: electric, steam, and gasoline, and gasoline engines. And everybody assumed it was going to be either electric or steam. And so that turned out not to be true. And part of that was a power play between the people, the oil companies who really wanted the business. Second of all, the automobile was going to clean up the world. So the streets of the world were covered with, well, basically horse shit, because all the transportation was by horses, and the horses, well, they're not toilet trained. And so it was really unsanitary to cross the street. And the automobile didn't do that. And so it was assumed the automobile would clean up the streets, and it did. But nobody actually ever imagined that there might be billions of automobiles in the world, and that the exhaust from the automobile would cause all sorts of problems. It causes illnesses, lung problems, and of course, climate change. And nobody could have foreseen that in that time. Just like when computers were developed, it was a thought they'd be very expensive and only be used by a small number of people. And nobody thought that computers would be so small and so common that, well, every house has hundreds of them really hidden away. Not every house, but many houses. But your automobile has more and more and more computers in them because they're inexpensive today, some of them, and they're essential to many of our devices. It's very difficult to predict how things are going to be used and whether they'll be used well or not. Some of the social media were really wonderful when they came out, but as it went around the world and more people use it, it's being used to spread lies and gossip and hurtful and damaging information. Nobody foresaw that. And so it's very difficult to know what the future is going to be. You do your best. You try to predict what's going to happen, but there's no guarantee that the thing that you built that everybody thought was wonderful and was for good use turns out to be bad. It's just not possible.
Thanks for sharing that, Don. It almost feels like, just do your best, consider the trade-offs, and just let the universe play.
But that's why you have to understand ethics too, and you have to understand morality, which is also complex because actually different cultures have different views about ethics and morality. But you have to really do your best to understand what's fair for human beings. Okay, what's your second question?
Well, I just want to quickly follow up on that because I think it's interesting when you talk about the word fair, because what is fair to one person might not be maybe to the other in a different context. So how do we rationalize that?
Well, there are lots and lots of people who worry about that. There are the philosophers, but also social scientists, and for that matter, in medicine. Healthcare people are really trained about ethics and morality, which again differs from location to location, country to country, or culture to culture. So there are no easy answers when you're talking about human behavior because, well, we're really complex structures, complex beings with complex ideas and thoughts. Yep, no easy answers.
Thanks for that, Don. The last question, a lot of folks actually ask this online as well, but I thought it's meaningful. We're living in the 21st century. A lot of things are changing. What are some of the 21st century skills you believe that would be essential, fundamental, and it's not going to change for designers in order for them to make a meaningful difference in the world? and maybe extend beyond designers, just humans, right? What do we need?
Everything is changing. First of all, we are in the midst. There have been some major revolutions in the way people lived over the lifetime of people. The invention of writing really changed everything. That was one of the most powerful revolutions in the world. And then the invention of arithmetic and different ways of transportation, and the invention of the first engines, steam engines at first, which made all sorts of things possible that weren't before, and made mass manufacturing possible. And then finally, today what we have is we have new revolutions in materials, new kinds of materials coming out, which are sometimes stronger, sometimes lighter, sometimes less expensive, and sometimes all of that at the same time. New methods of manufacturing, like additive manufacturing, commonly known as 3D printing, except there are many versions that are not necessarily 3D, but they're additive. You add new materials to make what you're wanting, which means you can design things that have holes in the middle. You can't do that with traditional manufacturing. And so you make things that are weird shapes that we never thought of before, that are also stronger and lighter than anything we had before. And as I said, new kinds of materials, a number of which are biodegradable, so that when the lifetime is over with, they will degrade naturally through nature into something that's really good fertilizer or useful for some other purpose. And then we have new types of sensors, and new types of communication devices, and new types of computational devices, and new ways of traveling. The whole drone revolution is going to be very exciting. And basically everything is changing. And yes, we have new and more powerful computers that all dominate our lives. And of course, artificial intelligence. So basically, you can't go to school, end the school, and say, okay, now I know what I need for the rest of my life. You have to always be learning. So the most important thing is to continually be learning new things throughout life. And this is true of everybody, not just the design profession. It's important in the design profession because we are the ones who make use of all these new technologies in doing new and exciting things for people and for societies. And there we really have to be careful that we aren't destroying the world while we're making these wonderful new devices. We need a whole new way of making and manufacturing and distributing things. And again, including digital things, including so-called, non-substantive things, because they all get implemented on substantive physical things. So always keep learning.
Thanks for that, Don. And if there's anything that we haven't mentioned in this session, any advice you want to share, any final thoughts to close off today's session?
Well, of course, there's many things we haven't mentioned because I'm trying to address the whole world, which is huge. But I think that was a good job, and I thank you. You did a really good job of asking really insightful questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Don. And where can people find you after today's session if they want to learn more about your work or continue to follow your journey?
Well, it's my website, jnd.org. JND means just noticeably different. It's a psychological term, jnd.org, or on the website of our prize competition, our award competition. And I don't do much in social media, I'm afraid. And the one main social medium I use is LinkedIn, because it's the one for professionals. And so I enjoy it among the others. But yeah, I can be found.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Don. We'll be sharing all of these links with everyone. Don, it's been a pleasure discussing these important topics and insights with you, and you have been so open to share with us. Your insights are extremely invaluable for us to understand the future of humanity and design, which has a huge impact on our world. So just want to say thank you for joining all of us today, and to everyone who joined us, thank you for showing up every single month and for our group sessions. Thank you, Don.
So, two things before I quit. Thank you for a great moderator. But second, I can see in the corner of my eye the chat and the continually new questions and new things coming up. And I apologize to all of those who put in questions to me or comments, but I can't read them because I'm trying hard to attend to the questions and the answers. So I wasn't able to follow the chat at the same time.
we will get that to you someday, hopefully, Don.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Don, and thanks
Thank you,
everyone.
everybody.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Bye.